I knew things were off the rails the second Mark started speed scrolling through my deck like it was a BuzzFeed quiz. No questions, no eye contact, just loud sipping and that smug little smirk he wore like a name tag. You still color code these manually? Jesus. What is this? Excel cosplay. He laughed, loud enough for the intern to flinch. I didn't flinch. I've been called worse by better. My job wasn't to dazzle him. It was to make sure when the floor dropped, someone still knew where the emergency exits were. That day's quarterly prep was supposed to be clean. A straight shot. Walk them through the 6 tabs, tie it to margin performance, cue the nodding. We'd done it 100 times before. Same spreadsheet, just smarter with every cycle. But this time, I had a new variable, a department lead who thought strategic meant parroting the last TED Talk he half-watched in an Uber. If you're still listening and somehow not subscribed yet, do us a favor. Hit that button, tap the like. Seriously, it means a lot to the team that brings you these. All right. Back to the chaos. Mark had joined from a startup that went belly up 6 months after launch. You wouldn't know it by the way he threw jargon around like it owed him rent. He told the product team to move fast and fail louder. Told HR they needed to vibe check the pipeline. Told me, without blinking, that I was too legacy to scale. I've been in tech ops long enough to know when a reorg is just an ego parade in a new suit. Mark was all parade. He came in, renamed half our dashboards, replaced the client-facing data tiles with animated metrics no one asked for, and scheduled weekly alignment huddles that made me miss root canals. And still, I kept my mouth shut. Let the children play. Because what he didn't know, what he never even asked, was that every profitable system launch in the last 5 years had my fingerprints on it. Not just input, ownership. The logic trees he thought were quaint were legally embedded in our enterprise contracts. The workflows he mocked, audited, insured, and tied to my continuity signature. But none of that mattered to him. Mark treated documentation like junk mail. He was too busy trying to make everything sexy for the investor deck. At first, it didn't bother me. I'd seen execs like him come and go, loud on Monday, boxed up by Friday. But then he started gutting things, killed my rollback protocol in prod because it made us look paranoid. Replaced the stable release tags with emoji badges. Deleted 5 years of system logs without backup. Said it was decluttering. My hands itched every time he touched the system, but I documented it all. Every change request, every Slack message, every overwritten field. Quietly, without drama, because I've learned you don't need to shout when the receipts scream louder. Then came the pre-brief. I had just finished walking through client-specific ROI from the last 3 quarters, when Mark leaned back, cracked his neck like he'd just solved world peace, and said, "We need to start thinking like disruptors, not librarians." I looked at the boardroom wall, same one that used to have my rollout diagram pinned on it, replaced now with a looping slideshow of buzzwords and bar charts with no axes. He spent 20 minutes pitching a pivot toward predictive liquidity modeling. No one asked what it meant, because no one knew, because he didn't either. I asked one question, politely, about deployment stability. He laughed. Old school thinking, we don't need safety nets, we need velocity. I wish I could say that was the moment I knew he was going to implode. But truthfully, I knew the moment he called me Miss Excel 2012 in front of our junior devs. It wasn't personal. It was predictable. Because Mark wasn't just arrogant. He was dangerous in the way only people with partial access and too much confidence can be. So I smiled, closed my laptop, walked out of the meeting and sent myself one clean export of the original dashboard metadata. Then I opened my archived permissions log, the one with his sign-off next to mine. The fuse was lit. He just didn't know he was standing on top of the dynamite. By the time his second Monday rolled around, Mark had already called an emergency modernization summit, which in plain English meant he gathered everyone under 35 into conference room B, played a Spotify playlist called Disruption Vibes, and pointed at a whiteboard with phrases like Next Gen Synergy Stack and No More Gatekeepers, scribbled across it in dry erase blood. I wasn't invited. Not that I cared. My systems don't need playlists. They need uptime. I found out I'd been locked out when I tried to load the investor-facing dashboards before our usual Thursday review. Access denied. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a credentials sync issue. Maybe IT was testing some new role-based policy. But then I got the slack from Ava in HR. Hey, just looping you in, Mark said you're stepping back from frontline metrics. He mentioned you're focused more on legacy documentation. Legacy documentation. That's what he called 5 years of audited SOX compliant revenue modeling. That's what he called the reason our largest investor had even doubled down last year. I didn't reply. Just opened a private window and pulled the most recent server audit log. There it was. Access revoked by M. Hensley. Time-stamped. No request. No justification. Just an axe. Still, I didn't push back. I pulled out the drive I keep for these moments. Cold storage, every dashboard version, every data schema, every internal note I'd written across 5 fiscal years, neatly filed with edit trails and cross-reference indexes. I made a fresh backup, labeled it for recovery use only, and moved it into a private vault. He thought I wouldn't notice. He thought I was slow. He didn't realize I had built the very rules he was now trying to bypass. 2 days later, I overheard him in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, saying, "We've removed a lot of the friction points. Eric was holding up deployment with sign-offs. It's better now, faster." Friction points. What he meant was, we removed the only person who actually understood how this place stays legally afloat. Because here's the thing he never checked. Not once. Page 6 of the investor mandate, the fine print, the part they don't bullet in the onboarding deck. It listed me by name as the systems continuity officer for our 3 highest grossing clients, not a ceremonial title, a contractual designation, which meant no back-end infrastructure changes, no API rerouting, no new third-party integrations, and certainly no data warehousing shifts could be executed without my formal approval. He had gone live with 3 of them. 0 clearance, 0 audit trail. 1 Slack emoji from a dev marked green. I saved it all. Every overwritten commit, every signed-off change without review, every half-baked schema he'd pushed through a junior analyst because it felt more modern. And I started my own file. MH, unapproved changes. It had screenshots, source logs, metadata with his name time-stamped on deleted rollback protections. A tidy little narrative forming. I didn't send it anywhere. Yet. He didn't stop at sidelining me. That week, he killed the monthly ops retro, saying we should focus on vision, not postmortems. When a client-side engineer flagged missing revenue data in the weekly summary, he replied, "Yeah, Eric's old model did some weird inflation adjustment thing. We stripped it." That weird thing? It was called FASB compliance. He stripped it without even asking what it was. The margin report they sent out was off by 1.3 marks. It took 4 hours for legal to notice. When they did, they asked me, quietly, if I still had the original calculation files. I did. I always do. But instead of giving them directly, I packaged it inside a clean visual compare log. 1 tab for my model, 1 for Mark's. Color-coded deltas, a line at the bottom. Difference exceeds audit threshold by 1.36 m. See metadata for origin timestamps. Legal didn't reply. But 3 hours later, I saw a new document request go out from compliance. To him. That night, I got an email from Garrison Holdings. Just a line from one of their technical liaisons. Still listed as continuity lead, correct? I replied with a PDF of the mandate, highlighted page 6, no commentary, because I didn't need to argue. He had already made the mistake of assuming I was gone, forgotten. But legacy doesn't mean irrelevant. It means permanent. Mark loved prep calls. Not because he prepared, God no, but because they gave him a stage, a captive audience, just enough structure to pretend he was in control. This one was with Garrison Holdings, the group that essentially floated our last 3 expansion rounds. They didn't ask for flashy decks. They asked for reliability, margins, continuity, which historically meant they asked for me. This time, they got Mark. It started like every other investor call. A bit of small talk, someone accidentally unmuted while chewing, the usual greetings and screen share fumbling. I kept my camera off, same as always. I wasn't there to perform, just to make sure the numbers held up under scrutiny. Mark, on the other hand, showed up like he was auditioning for a Netflix docuseries. Ring light on, black button down, sleeves rolled. He'd changed the entire slide template to some modern, minimalist nonsense with microscopic fonts and no grid lines. One tab in, Garrison's senior analyst Meredith asked about Q3 cost of delivery anomalies. Mark blinked. Yeah, so the variance there's from outdated legacy pipelines mostly. We've started streamlining. Translation. He deleted our post-release correction buffer and didn't adjust the input models. I waited. I wasn't going to interrupt. I wanted him to own his genius. A few more fumbles. Then came the fatal moment. He thought the line had muted. I saw him tap the little button in Zoom, that smug flick of the wrist. He leaned over to Ava from HR, who, bless her, looked like she wanted to melt into the carpet, and muttered, not even quietly, "It's not our fault. He's just too slow and stubborn." And for a moment, there was silence. Not the awkward kind, the loaded kind, like the air had been sucked out of the call. Then a voice came through, crisp, cold. It was Alan Chen, Garrison's lead partner. He didn't raise his tone. He didn't laugh. "If he's too slow," he said, "why do all his projects make money and yours don't?" That was it. No elaboration, no follow-up, just silence after. Mark's face dropped like someone had unplugged him. His mouth opened, then closed again. Ava looked like she wanted to crawl under the desk. Someone from finance fake coughed. And I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't say a word. Because that line, that one deliberate sentence wasn't just a slap. It was a fracture. The kind that doesn't make noise until it splits the whole foundation. I knew then. Someone upstairs had been watching, not passively, closely. See, Garrison isn't sentimental. They're not loyal to people. They're loyal to results. And I had 5 years of results, clean and traceable, that had carried their portfolio through 2 market contractions. Mark had 30 days of hot air and mismatched margins, and now they'd hurt him. Really hurt him. Without polish, without prep, without spin. He'd shown his hand. Worse. He'd exposed his ignorance. He didn't just insult me, he insulted the architecture that had made them money. The rest of the call limped along. Questions turned dry, no smiles. A "thanks, we'll circle back" that landed like a funeral hymn. After we logged off, I went back to my terminal. Pulled up a side-by-side of the current platform deployments versus the last pre-Mark release cycle. The contrast was brutal. Stability variance was up 12%. 3 integrations had failed quietly. Customer complaints were rising. But I didn't send it. Not yet. Because Alan hadn't said that for my benefit. He'd said it as a litmus test for everyone else on that call. He wanted to see who caught the message. I had. And from the pale faces staring into their webcams afterward, I wasn't the only one. The shift had started. Not with a bang, with a whisper, quiet and sharp. And Mark? He still hadn't noticed the knife in his back was shaped like a question. I was halfway through logging error reports for a client-facing sync issue Mark's team had optimized when the ping came in. R. Lewin, Garrison Tech Liaison. "Hey, would you happen to have the original systems blueprint from the 2020 integration? The one predating the Q4 rollout." No fluff, no greetings, just straight to the point. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was unsure, I knew exactly where it lived, but because I needed to check the tone. Requests like that from Garrison weren't casual. They didn't do curiosity. They did investigations with velvet gloves. I opened the archive, decrypted the backup, and there it was. The original blueprint. Color-coded systems grid, integrated checkpoint logic, and the full 43-page audit-compliant deployment stack. The one I'd designed during our highest revenue year. The one that got us through the acquisition storm and 4 separate compliance audits without a single red flag. I included the deployment logs from 2020-2022, patch notes, rollback protocols, a clean YAML export of the job scheduling API. Then, for good measure, I attached the memo Mark had signed when he insisted on removing our failover gates last month. He hadn't even cleared it with DevSec, but his initials were on the final PDF, right next to a version note that still contained my comments. You could see the timestamp. You could see that I'd warned him in writing about the risks. I didn't add a subject line, no explanation, just sent the zip folder. No reply, no thanks. But I saw the read receipt. That's the thing about people like Garrison. They don't waste acknowledgement on people they already trust. When they request something from you quietly, it means you've already passed the test. They're just collecting ammo. And that wasn't vindication. That was confirmation. That someone, somewhere up the chain, had taken the time to trace the wires back to the person who actually kept them from sparking. Not the face in the meeting, the hands in the back end, the ones who wrote the playbook, ran the models, fixed the unspoken disasters. And someone had seen the cracks. After I hit send, I stood up and stretched. The office was nearly empty. Mark had started encouraging remote days for focus work, which really just meant fewer witnesses to the circus. I looked out over the floor, desks glowing quietly, the buzz of machines doing their thing because someone, me, had configured them to recover from the dumb things other people did. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was worried, because the shift had begun. It was like being back in the early days, before the systems were automated, when you could feel the weight of your work in every line of code, every cooling fan, every database sync. Except now, the architecture wasn't just technical, it was political. And I had just placed a schematic in the hands of the only people who knew how to read between the lines. The blueprint wasn't just a diagram, it was a ledger, proof of who'd built what, who had maintained it, who had warned, and who had ignored. And upstairs had started tracing. I didn't gloat, didn't forward the request to anyone. Let Mark keep his illusions for now. Because while he was busy crafting tomorrow's pitch, the board was already opening yesterday's receipts. He came in like he always did, late, loud, and with a coffee cup big enough to drown a small animal. His shirt was tighter than last week, like he was trying to flex confidence into his chest. "Morning, disruptors," he grinned, winking at no one in particular, and took his spot at the head of the table. I was already logged in, notes open, agenda clean. We were 5 minutes into the weekly strategy sync when he dropped the day's buzzword like a smoke bomb. "Agile redundancy through chaotic flow," he announced, like it meant something. I don't know if he'd pulled it from some Medium article or if he'd just dreamt it up mid-latte, but he said it like it would be printed on t-shirts by next quarter. People chuckled nervously. A few scribbled it down like gospel. Then he looked at me, just me, and cocked his head with that self-satisfied smirk. "Eric, I think we both know you're not built for this speed." The room went still. Not dramatically, not gasping, just a subtle tightening. Even the intern stopped typing. I didn't answer. I just clicked open my calendar, and there it was. 10:30 a.m. One-on-one. Lead investor. Eric. My stomach didn't drop. My hands didn't shake. I just stared at that line of text like it was written in stone. It wasn't sent by Mark, wasn't from HR. The invite came directly from Garrison Holdings' partner scheduler, flagged high importance, read-only access, no option to decline. 10 minutes before, I'd been not built for speed. Now I had a one-on-one with the man who owned the speed. I looked up slowly. Mark had moved on. He was pointing at a slide someone else had built, claiming it represented our new frontier. I recognized it immediately. It was a color-flipped version of a data pipeline I'd prototyped 2 years ago, just stripped of context and loaded with buzzwords. Someone from design asked about the source metrics. Mark waved it off. "It's forward-facing logic. Don't worry about the back end." Which meant, of course, there was no back end. My calendar reminder blinked softly at the corner of my screen. 10 minutes to the meeting. I closed my laptop mid-sentence. Mark paused. "You heading out, Eric?" I met his eyes, calm, flat. "Calendar's full." A few people looked up. You could feel it, like a shift in air pressure before a thunderstorm. Because for weeks, Mark had been the center of the room, the voice, the direction. He cast shadows and expected the rest of us to shrink under them. But this was different. The man he'd spent a month trying to erase had just disappeared from his schedule and reappeared on the investors. And Mark's name, nowhere on the agenda. He tried to recover. "Hey, make sure to sync your updates with my office later. We're aligning everyone under the new velocity architecture." But nobody replied. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at me. Not because I was dramatic, not because I'd raised my voice, because when someone vanishes from your map and reappears on theirs, People notice. As I walked out, I passed Ava from HR in the hallway. Her eyes flicked to my badge, then to the time. She opened her mouth like she wanted to ask something, then closed it. Just gave a tight nod. Good. Because what was coming next wasn't going to be explained in an all-hands memo. It would be delivered quietly, directly, and without ceremony. The same way systems fail, when people stop noticing who actually holds the keys. It was a closed-door session. Board, executive liaisons, select departmental leads. Technically, Mark had no business presenting, but he'd managed to wedge himself in by promising a revolutionary pivot in our reporting infrastructure. I came in through the side entrance. No one greeted me. No one needed to. The invitation in my inbox said everything. Direct attendance requested. System architecture oversight. It didn't come from my department. It came from the board. Mark was already standing when I arrived, hands flailing over a slide that looked like a Pinterest board for someone trying to rebrand business school. No timestamps, no source labels, just gradients, abstract icons, and phrases like intelligent disruption matrix that meant exactly nothing. And with this approach, he was saying, we'll unhook from dated legacy flows and lean fully into decentralized logic. He clicked. Next slide. A spinning globe graphic with the phrase, global synergy through elastic metric threads. I counted 3 raised eyebrows and 1 visible eye roll. That's when Alan from Garrison leaned forward and tapped the conference table once. Flat. Sharp. Where's the man whose charts made us 14 million last quarter? Mark froze, blinked twice. Excuse me? Alan didn't repeat himself. He just waited. The room went silent, like someone had shut off the HVAC. You could hear the hard drives spinning in the corner of the AV rig. Mark looked around for support, but no one moved. I stepped forward without a word. Didn't ask permission, didn't glance at Mark. Just walked to the port, plugged in my laptop, and pulled up the original dashboard. My dashboard. The one with the time-tagged data sets, client-specific breakdowns, forecast deltas, and real audited numbers. The one that had driven the last expansion decision and earned Garrison their top quarterly bonus. The room leaned in. I didn't perform. I didn't narrate like Mark. I just walked them through the truth. Here's the adjusted flow-through model based on the original pipeline. No manipulation, just real efficiency metrics. These 3 functions, highlighted here, accounted for 68% of the margin stability in Q3. The variables were based on predicted delays from external vendor handoffs, which were accounted for in the dynamic buffer logic. I paused, not to build drama, but to give them space to absorb it. This wasn't theater. This was structure. I moved to the next tab. These integration logs were stripped from the investor-facing reports last month. That decision removed our FASB-aligned margin inflation factors, which misrepresented our trailing 12-month revenue delta by $1.36 million. Alan nodded. Slowly, Mark tried to interject. That adjustment wasn't, but another board member cut in. Was this adjustment made with your sign-off? I didn't even need to answer. The metadata in the report lit up on screen. Version 8.3, modified by M. Hensley, no cosign. I let it hang. No commentary. Just the raw, hard light of traceable decisions. Because this is what Mark never understood. I wasn't the voice that interrupted. I was the infrastructure that endured. While he marketed momentum, I built architecture. Quietly, persistently, permanently. The next 10 minutes were questions. Real ones, directed at me, about rollback plans, about client-specific fail-safes, about revenue drift alerts and contractually bound margin gates. I answered everyone with timestamps, visual references, and zero filler. Not pride, precision. That's what the board wanted. Not drama, not charisma. Just someone who knew what the hell they were doing and had the receipts to prove it. When I finally sat down, Alan didn't thank me. He didn't need to. He just closed his folder and said, "That'll be all." He didn't say it to me. He said it to Mark, who, for once, had nothing left to pitch. Thursday evening, the office emptied the way it always did before a long weekend. Quiet, slow, lights dimming one by one like the building itself was exhaling. I stayed late, not to prove a point, just because habits don't break with drama. I was finishing a rollback inspection on a vendor API that Mark had streamlined by disabling our failover triggers. He'd called it cutting the fat. I called it gambling with client trust. Just before 8 p.m., I got the system alert. Badge access revoked. M. Hensley. No fireworks, no company-wide Slack message. Just a single entry in the security log. Quiet as a closed door. That's how HR handles it when someone wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. No emails, no exit interview calendar holds. Just gone. Friday morning, I walked past his desk. The chair was pushed in, monitor unplugged, a sad little cardboard box sitting half-taped on the edge. Someone had tried to fold his branded hoodie on top like a courtesy. The keycard slot on his drawer was flashing red. His name tag was still clipped to the monitor arm, forgotten. No one asked what happened. They didn't need to. The silence said everything. At 9:13 a.m., a new org chart populated in the internal system. Mark's name had been removed completely. Not reassigned, not moved laterally, just erased like a whiteboard smudge. At 10:04, his Slack handle grayed out. Auto-deactivated. At 11:45, a help desk ticket was flagged as urgent from HR, recover files for Hensley. Legal hold requested. By noon, it was like he'd never worked here, like the system had healed around him. I didn't speak about it. I didn't gloat. I didn't forward the badge alert or the org chart to anyone, because real power doesn't need applause. It just needs patience. Around 2 p.m., I was walking back from the archive room when I heard footsteps behind me. Turned the corner and nearly collided with Calvian, our founder. He'd been in Singapore for months, expansion talks, partner summits, trying to keep our global roadmap from collapsing under Mark's vision. He paused when he saw me, took a step back, tilted his head slightly like he was trying to recognize something half-remembered. Then he smiled, small, real. Didn't realize you were that Eric. I nodded once. Depends which one you mean. He laughed. Not a big laugh, just that kind people make when they realize they overlooked something valuable for too long. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't need to. The hallway was quiet again. Not tense, just balanced. Like the building had recalibrated, like the wires under the walls were humming in sync again. That night, as I packed up, I saw a sticky note someone had left on my terminal. FYI, the investor portal's back on your schedule. They asked for you by name. No title, no sender. I peeled it off, folded it in half, and slid it into my notebook. Not because I needed the reminder, but because even in a place built on metrics and margins, some things are worth keeping in ink. It came through as a calendar update. No ceremony, no subject line shouting about promotions or new leadership. Just a quiet ping on a Tuesday morning. Org alignment, new role access granted. I clicked it open, expecting maybe a reshuffling, maybe some cleanup fallout after Mark's exit. Instead, I found my name under a new header, Director, Systems Continuity, Board Liaison, Direct Access, Strategic Architecture and Compliance. No meeting, no HR call, just a line in a chart that changed everything. I read it twice, then once more. It didn't come with a corner office. It didn't come with balloons or internal Slack emojis. Hell, the floor didn't even know. But when I checked the permissions console, I saw the difference. Platform-level admin, protocol override rights, audit trail visibility that spanned the entire infrastructure, contractors included. And one more change. The executive calendar now had a permanent placeholder tagged eMattix Input Review Pre-Deployment. No one else had editing access. I didn't move desks. I didn't redecorate. I didn't even tell anyone. But the shift was seismic. The same badge I'd worn for 5 years suddenly opened floors it hadn't before. The legal team started copying me on clauses tied to vendor APIs. Security sent change requests for my review. Finance asked for my input before quarterly disclosures. They didn't say why. They didn't need to. The board had drawn a quiet line, and I was on the side that didn't need approval anymore. As for the platform Mark had tried to rewrite, I reopened the project, not to rebuild it from scratch, not to prove anything, just to restore what had worked. I took his version, stripped of context, bloated with buzzwords, and reverse engineered it until it looked like something that could stand. Not dazzle, not dance, just hold weight. The backbone I'd written 3 years ago was still sound. The logic trees still predicted low drift within 0.3% variance. I reconnected the rollback failsafes, reinforced the margin protection layer, restored the audit compliance fields he'd wiped. 3 days later, I pushed it to staging under a new release name, Stabilis 1.0, not flashy, just solid. Legal cleared it. Dev signed off. QA flagged 0 criticals. I didn't even announce it. But at 4:12 p.m., Alan from Garrison forwarded the deployment notification with one line. That's the system we invested in. No signature, no flourish, just precision. I sat back, not with pride, not with relief, just clarity. Mark had tried to build a monument to himself out of ideas he didn't understand. I rebuilt a working system out of facts, functions, and restraint. This wasn't a revenge arc. It was a restoration. The trust was never in who shouted loudest. It was in who, when things broke, had the blueprint and the steady hands to fix it. My desk hadn't moved an inch, but every door around it had quietly unlocked. The dinner was at some rooftop venue with a skyline view and signature cocktails named after financial buzzwords. Liquidity Breeze, Margin Mule, the burn rate. Garrison Holdings knew how to throw a celebration. Clean suits, tight smiles, and just enough jazz to make everyone pretend they weren't tracking quarterly forecasts in their heads between bites. I sat at the end of the long table, near the catering doors, same as always. No name card, no fanfare. Just an empty seat that someone, likely Alan, had made sure stayed unclaimed until I walked in. The speeches began the way they always did. The founder praised the resilience of innovation. The VP of strategy thanked cross-functional leadership. The words all washed over me like elevator music. Then the COO of Garrison stood. No slideshow, no preamble. He raised his glass and looked straight across the table, not at the C-suite lineup, not at the brand team, at me. This man, he said, voice calm and carrying, didn't raise his voice once, but he built everything we just toasted. People clapped. Some glanced around like they weren't quite sure who he meant until they saw where he was looking. A few heads turned. A few finally recognized me. One junior partner leaned in, half drunk on something pink and expensive, and whispered, "So, what do you actually do?" I didn't look up. Just opened my folder and flipped to the top page. A clean, annotated systems logic map time-stamped from our 2020 integration. There were notes in the margins, ones I'd written at 3 a.m. during a client panic, ones Mark had once called overkill. "Make sure the lights stay on," I said. He blinked, thought it was a joke. Then he didn't. The dinner moved on. They brought out dessert trays shaped like network graphs. People laughed, shook hands, pitched vague collaborations over creme brulee. I slipped away before coffee. I didn't need the afterglow. My work had already spoken, on time, under budget, and in compliance. On my way out, I passed through the executive floor. The lights were dimmed, but the motion sensors flicked on as I walked by. And there it was, mounted behind glass just beside the boardroom entrance, my original rollout diagram. The one I'd drawn in Sharpie during the chaotic integration week. They'd cleaned it up, framed it in brushed aluminum, and titled it simply, Continuity Protocol, V1.0. No plaque with my name. Didn't need one. The people who mattered already knew. The ones who didn't? They'd keep asking who kept the lights on. And every time something worked, something held, something didn't break, it'd be my answer they were living in. No legacy song, no statue, just a silent system that stayed up while the loud ones fell down.